Thank you for tuning in and listening to Bob Bennett. Today, listen in as Bob Bennett interviews Anthony Graves, aka Death Row Exoneree 138, as he tells his story of lies and legalized deceptive justice.
My name is Anthony Graves, better known as Death Row Exoneree number 138. I was wrongfully convicted. I spent 18 and a half years in prison, 12 and a half on Texas death row, and I had 2 execution dates. Amnesty and I partnered up together around my story to share with the rest of the world. I think the world needs to know about what's going on in our criminal justice system, the inhumanity of it. I didn't understand why would this happen to me. I didn't bother nobody, I wasn't a criminal. And so when I got out and I started telling people my story, I seen the impact that it was having, and people actually wanted to get involved after hearing about the injustice. We don't wake up thinking about the death penalty over here, whether it's right or wrong. Until it knocks on your door, you really don't even have a conversation about it.
Brandon Dudley, who's with Senator Ellis, was supposed to introduce our speaker, but he called in sick late, and he's okay, but he couldn't make it. So at the last minute, we reached out to Kim Ogg, who's our candidate for Harris County District Attorney, to introduce our speaker. And as it turned out, that she said she was in court, may or may not make it, will try to make it. She's here. So we reached out to Judge Overstreet, who also agreed to introduce our speaker. And as I realized, both of them are in the same race, so please do not consider it as my vote for either of those. You decide, and I'd like to invite Kim Ogg to introduce Anthony Graves.
I'm Kim Ogg. Welcome, everyone. It's no surprise to lawyers that 27 of us were signed up and 77 of us showed up for lunch. We're a flexible crowd. We've got court. I wanted to take a minute to introduce to you today our speaker, somebody who I've come to know in the last year and a half, somebody whose story shocked and appalled me as a professional, especially as a former prosecutor, and somebody who I think can bring great change through the suffering and the experience that he had to a system that is broken and sadly in need of reform. So let me tell you a little bit about Anthony. Anthony was prosecuted in Burleson County by a fellow named Charles Sebesta, who's no longer a lawyer. Mr. Sebesta, I knew him. He was active in the Prosecutors Association, talked a real hard game. Unfortunately, Anthony's conviction was secured with perjured testimony, with undisclosed deals, and it brought to the public's attention the idea that the prosecution, if they have information that would show somebody could be innocent, and especially information that shows they are innocent, then there's a basic premise that they ought to share that with the defense, and they ought to do it timely. They ought to do it before the man spends 18 and a half years on death row, which is exactly what happened to Anthony Graves. And so, as you listen to Anthony's story, remember, this is the story of a man who was convicted on virtually no physical or direct evidence. A man whose life was held in the hands of a prosecutor, one prosecutor exclusively, who got to decide if he lived or died, and who was able to convince a jury with improper evidence, with perjured testimony, that Anthony was not only guilty, but Anthony should be killed by our state, by our society, the death penalty, that he was actually worthy of imposition of that he was actually worthy of being executed by our society. That's what Charles Sebesta did. He had that much power. And he was actually scheduled, he had 2 separate execution dates. And so I don't know how we repay or apologize or thank someone for the changes that suffering brought, but all I can tell you is I respect it. And I do want to share with you just a minute more the result that it had in our practice of criminal law in the field that I primarily practice in. As a young prosecutor, I've got to tell you, in the 80s, I was taught that there were no such things as wrongfully convicted people in Texas. I was taught as a prosecutor by our association that there had never been a wrongful conviction proven in Texas. Not just on death row, not just a capital, but that there were no wrongful convictions based on actual innocence. I mean, that was the party line. And so when you're a young and impressionable lawyer, you may not necessarily believe it's all true, but that was what we were being taught. And so as technology changed with the advent of DNA, with the improvements and the debunking of so many junk sciences, and then with not the flood, but to us what seemed like almost a flood of exonerations, with Anthony's being as prominent as they come, a man on death row. Michael Morton served 25, but he wasn't on death row. These are horrific cases. They happen to our fellow friends, neighbors, our peers. Anthony is everyone. It could happen to us. And the only good thing about Anthony's story is that it motivated lawyers and our legislature to change the law and to force prosecutors not just to have an open file, but to be held responsible under the law for giving every piece of information that could lead to somebody's innocence or finding him not guilty. We have to give it to the defense now, and we have to under the law. And that is a huge change. We just recently saw a case where a prosecutor said, it's not Brady material if I don't believe it. That's the Temple case, and that's quoting Kelly Siegler, and that's Judge Gist wrote it in his opinion. And that's what you're dealing with. You now have generations of lawyers who've come to believe that if we don't somehow believe it, even if it might show his innocence, we don't have to turn it over. And that's just nonsense. It's not constitutional. It's not American. It's bad for our democracy. And I am so honored to call Anthony Graves my friend. I think you'll learn a lot from what happened to him. And if his story doesn't motivate you to go out and change our criminal justice system, I don't know what will. You've changed it a lot, Anthony, and I'm looking forward to you changing it a whole lot more.
I am who I am because of what's going on in my life, and I give thanks to God for that. Back in 1992, when a horrible crime had taken place, 6 people were murdered. They were shot, stabbed, bludgeoned to death, house set on fire, I guess in an obvious attempt to hide the crime. 6 bodies, 4 were children. 1 was a teenage daughter, 1 was a grandmother. Can you imagine the outrage? Because this happened in a small town, Burleson County, Somerville, Texas. It's never happened like that before, and they were outraged. Matter of fact, I mean, the mayor came out in the paper the next day and said that whoever had done this crime didn't even deserve a new trial. They should just be caught and hanged. It took me 6,640 days to come back home, along with 2 execution dates. And I got to witness many of the young men that our state is murdering down there. I got to know them. And they weren't these bad actors as we all like to portray them. Okay, some of them had made one mistake, 5 minutes of their life, and we killed them. Because the citizens want to believe in you. They want to believe in our system. And if you're bringing somebody in there, they want to believe that you got it right. You know that. But you got to be responsible for it. And we got to hold you all accountable. Too many innocent people are losing their freedoms in their lives because we do not want to look under the rock anymore. It costs too much. Well, it cost that mother her child. It cost that child his father. It costs more than any dollar you can ever put on it. It don't cost too much. It saved lives.
Anthony, Bob Bennett, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Bob.
And on behalf of Lone Star College, we thank you for the speech you gave. And one of the things that I wanted to ask, though, for the young people at Lone Star, what is your opinion about what they should do to help further either your foundation or to make sure that justice is done in other cases? What would be your recommendation?
I think my first recommendation is that for students that really want to make a difference, that they should get involved with volunteer work. Volunteer work with these organizations that's really getting out there trying to, equal our justice system up. I think that like Innocent Projects, my foundation, they need people who are passionate about reform to get involved on a volunteer basis. Also, I think that what's most important is you got to use your voice in this state, in this nation, in this country, and that is you have to show up at the ballot box and be a voice with your vote. It is so important that we show up and we vote the people that we feel like would have our interests. One of the problems is we don't think our vote counts. But I always try to tell students that if your vote didn't count, why you think they spend so much money to keep you from voting? Your vote do count. You can make a difference at the ballot box, and I would say get involved in those ways.
What else would your foundation provide or information to the students, or what else could they do for your foundation?
Well, right now, my foundation, we are reaching out. Guys that are wrongfully convicted write to me all the time and ask for help. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get students, law students in particular, do some research on their cases and put together like a summary of facts for us. And then we're reaching out to law firms, trying to get those law firms to get involved in these cases. So that's the process right there. So what I would need, basically, I would need some volunteer researchers to help me do some research on these cases that are coming to me, and some people who are interested in communicating with these offenders that are writing to me and kind of keeping them abreast on what we're trying to do with their cases. So that's kind of what I would need in terms of volunteer work.
So at the bottom of this video, we'll put your name and the foundation's name and the telephone number they can call, and they can get in touch with your foundation and start the process that way.
Yes, sir. I would appreciate it.
Okay, Anthony. Good to see you.
Thank you so much, Bob.